parts. "He looks to me," chimed in the black-haired brother, "like a feller that might be taught something right here in Pale Annie's barroom. Anyway, he's got room at his table for two more." So saying, the two swallowed their drinks and rumbled casually down the length of the room until they came to the table where Mac Strann sat. Haw Haw Langley followed at a discreet distance and came within earshot to hear the deep voice of Mac Strann rumbling: "Sorry, gents, but that chair's took." The black-haired man sank into the indicated chair. "You're right," he announced calmly. "Anyone could see with half an eye that you ain't a fool. It's took by me." And he grinned impudently in the face of Mac Strann. The latter, who had been sitting with slightly bent head, now raised it and looked the pair over carelessly. There was in his eye the same dumb curiosity which Haw Haw Langley had seen many a time in the eye of a bull, leader of the herd. The giant explained carefully: "I mean, they's a friend of mine that's been sittin' in that chair." "If I ain't your friend," answered the black-haired brother instantly, "it ain't any fault of mine. Lay it up to yourself, partner." Mac Strann stretched out his hand on the surface of the table. He said: "I got an idea you'd better get out of that chair." The other turned his head slowly on all sides and then looked Mac Strann full in the face. "Maybe they's something wrong with my eyes," he said, "but I don't see no reason." The little dialogue had lasted long enough to focus all eyes on the table at the end of the room, and therefore there were many witnesses to what followed. The arm of Mac Strann shot out, his hand fastened in the collar of the black-haired man's shirt, and the latter was raised from his seat and propelled to one side by a convulsive jerk. He probably would have been sent crashing into the bar had not his shirt failed under the strain. It ripped in two at the shoulders, and the seeker after action, naked to the waist, went reeling back to the middle of the room before he gained his balance. After him went Mac Strann with an agility astonishing in that squat, formless bulk. His long arms were outstretched and his fingers tensed, and in his face there was an uncanny joy. His lip had lifted in that peculiarly disheartening sneer. He was not a pace from him of the black hair when a yell of rage behind him and the other brother leaped through the air and landed on Mac Strann's back. He doubled up, slipped his arms behind him, and the next instant, without visible reason, the red-headed man hurtled through the air and smashed against the bar with a jolt that sent glassware shivering and singing. Then he relaxed on the floor, a twisted and foolish-looking mass. As for the seeker after action, he had at first reached after his revolver, but he changed his mind at the last instant, and instead picked up the great poker which leaned against the stove. It was a ponderous weapon, and he had to wield it in both hands. As he swung it around his head there was a yell from men ducking out of the way, and Pale Annie curled his hand again around his favorite empty bottle. He had no good opportunity to demonstrate its efficiency, however. Mac Strann, crouching in a position from which he had catapulted the red-haired man, cast upwards a single glance at the other brother, and then he sprang in. The poker hissed through the air with the vigor of a strong man's arms behind it, and it would have cracked the head of Mac Strann like an empty eggshell if it had hit its mark, but it was heaved too high, and Mac Strann went in like a football player rushing the line, almost doubled up against the floor as he ran. His shoulder struck the other hardly higher than the knees, and they went down together, but doing so the head of Mac Strann's victim cracked against the floor, and he also was still. The exploit was greeted by a yell of applause, and then someone proposed a cheer, and it was given. It died off short on the lips of the applauders, however, for it was seen that Mac Strann was not yet done with his work, and he went about it in a manner which made men sober suddenly and exchange glances. First the stranger dragged the two brothers together, laying one of them face down on the floor. The second he placed over the first, back to back. Next he picked up the long poker from the floor and slipped it under the head and down to the neck of the first man. The bystanders watched in utter silence with a touch of horror coming now into their eyes. Now Mac Strann caught the ends of the iron and began to twist up on them. There was no result at first. He refreshed his hold and tried again. The sleeves of his shirt were seen to swell and then grow hard and taut with vast play of muscle beneath. His head bowed lower between his shoulders, and those shoulders trembled, and the muscles over them quivered like heat waves rising of a spring morning. There was a creaking now, and then the iron was seen to shiver and then bend slowly. And once it was wrenched out of the horizontal, the motion was more and more rapid, until when the giant was done with his labors, the ends of the iron overlapped around the necks of the two luckless brothers. Mac Strann stepped back and surveyed his work. The rest of the room was in silence, saving the red-headed man who was coming back to consciousness and now withered and groaned feebly. He could not rise, that was manifest, for the thick band of iron tied his neck to the neck of his brother. Upon this scene Mac Strann gazed with a thoughtful air, and then stepped to the side of the room where stood a bucket of dirty water recently used for mopping behind the bar. This he caught up, returned, and dashed the black, greasy water over the pair. If it had been electricity it could not have operated more effectively. The two awoke with one mind, and with a tremendous sputtering and cursing struggled to regain their feet. It was no easy thing, however, for when one stood up the other slipped and in his fall involved the brother. In the meantime it made a jest exactly suited to the minds of Elkhead, and shrieks of hysterical laughter rewarded their struggles, until at length they sat solemnly back to back, easing the pressure of the iron as best they might with their hands. Assembled Elkhead reeled about the room, drunken with laughter, but Mac Strann went quietly back to his table and paid no attention to the scene. There is an end to all good things, however, and finally the two brothers' concerted action together rose and then sidestepped towards the door, dripping the mop water at every step. Obviously they were bound for the blacksmith to lose their collar, and everyone in the saloon knew that the blacksmith was not in town. The old man who had done the hoedown hobbled to the end of the barroom, and before the table of Mac Strann made a speech to the effect that Elkhead had everything it needed except laughter, that Mac Strann had come to their assistance in that respect, and that if he, the old man, had the power, he would pension such an efficient jester and keep him permanently in the town. To all of this Mac Strann paid not the slightest heed, but with his fleshy brow puckered considered the infinite distance. Even the drink which Pale Annie, grateful for the averted riot, placed on the table before him, Mac Strann allowed to stand untasted, and it was private stock. It was at this time that Haw Haw Langley made his way back to the table and occupied the contested seat. "That was a bum play," he said solemnly to Mac Strann. "When Barry hears about what you done here to two men, do you think that he'll ever hit your trail?" The other started. "I never thought about it," he murmured, his thick lips as always framing speech with difficulty. "Do you suppose I ought to go back to the Cumberland place for him?" A yell rose at the farther end of the room. "A wolf! Hey, shoot the damn wolf!" "You fool!" cried another. "He ain't skinny enough to be a wolf. Besides, who ever heard of a tame wolf coming into a barroom?" Nevertheless, many a gun was held in readiness, and the men, even the most drunken, fell back to one side and allowed a free passage for the animal. It seemed indeed to be a wolf, and a giant of its kind, and it slunk now with soundless step through the silence of the barroom, glancing neither to right nor to left, until it came before the table of Mac Strann. There it halted and slunk back a little, the upper lip lifted away from the long fangs. Its eyes glittered upon the face of the giant, and then it swung about and slipped out of the barroom as it had come, in utter silence. In the utter silence Mac Strann leaned across the table to Haw Haw Langley. "He's come alone this time," he said, "but next time he'll bring his master with him. We'll wait." The Adam's apple rose and fell in the throat of Haw Haw. "We'll wait."